I went to see my physiotherapist yesterday, my lovely physio at Leese Hospital. It was brilliant. And I told him I was doing this challenge, and I said, what can I do to help me be able to stand up for 2 and 3 hours? And he said, here, have these balance exercises. So what I have to do at this point is to walk up and down my spare room, like in an American field sobriety test. And what I have to do is to put one foot in front of the other. And this is going to help me to stand up for 3 hours. How hard can it be? Okay. See, if this was by the side of the road, I'd be in prison for at least 5 years.
Are you ready? Do you want to do it? Are you ready? Yeah, yeah. Are you ready to rock? Yeah, yeah. Do you want to do it? Yeah, yeah. Get down on it. Yeah, yeah,
yeah. How hard can it be? How hard can it be to walk? As it turns out, quite difficult. Sorry. God, I hate my physiotherapist. I don't want to tempt fate by saying it's getting easier, but it seems to be. How hard can it be to put one foot in front of the other? I'm a human being. I should have learnt this skill in childhood. Apparently not. I'm not supposed to be hanging on to things. This is knackered proprioception in action. This is what I mean when I say that my body doesn't know where bits of it are in space, and why I have to look at things before I step on and off them. As it turns out, I'm a bit buggered doing this because I can't see my feet anyway. Just to make it really difficult, I now have to do step 1, which is basically just standing with my feet together. I now have to do that with my eyes shut. I don't expect this to go well. Woo! If anybody says I look like a tree, they're dead. Right, so now I have to do that standing on one leg. I can't even manage it on 2 legs. We'll see. Perhaps not. So, I felt like a bit of a step backwards on the pedals this morning, if I'm brutally honest. I managed 15 minutes, which is still pretty good going. And the reason I only did 15 minutes today was because I had literally just done my balance exercises as well. And although they look very simple, obviously they're just sort of standing and walking, putting one foot in front of the other, they do take quite a lot of brain processing power, which can make you quite tired because your brain is trying to process all these weird signals from joints that are in the wrong position, and I'll explain a bit more about that later. That's the proprioception in action. But actually it does just bring up a very, very good point in that I went on a date with a guy last year who, otherwise a really, really nice guy, who actually turned around to me halfway through dinner or whatever it was we were doing, lunch, I think, and said, why do you need your crutches? You don't seem to be using them much. You don't seem to be putting any weight through them. And that's why, because if I don't, I will probably fall over in the middle of the street, whichever way you look at it is just really undignified for everybody involved. So let that be a lesson. He didn't get a second date, which was a shame because he was a nice guy, but don't question people's mobility equipment. It's rude, it's irritating, and yes, we've heard it all before. So 15 minutes, I'm still quite pleased with that, but it was an exercise in knowing when to stop today, and that is so important with people with EDS. Pacing yourself and keeping your activity levels up, but stopping before you get to the point of pain is what they teach you to do. So that's what I did. I could probably have carried on for an extra couple of minutes, but my muscles in my back were starting to tighten up quite badly, and my leg was starting to tighten up, and I just thought, well, is it really worth the risk of doing an extra 2 minutes and not being able to do anything at all tomorrow? And I think that consistency is the most important thing at this stage, so I decided to stop, and hopefully that will turn out to be the right decision. This morning's workout partner, still on a retroglide kick. Don't know why, because like I said, I didn't particularly like it when it was released. And it's really, really grown on me. This morning I worked out to Dive Into the Sun live from the 2006 tour, which is just such a banging track.
Catastrophes, one eternal guarantees that don't mean much to me. Eternity is free. A giant leap a step too far. You can count your lucky stars. I'll read the signs for all our time and count on who we are. I know you know me. Gotta help me find the light. So convoluted attitudes we may as well as mine. Turn it up, turn it down. Now you know you are the one. Let's turn around and dive into the sun. Dive into the sun. You know that that's what you make it. So make it happen the way you want. Dive into the sun. You got to know how to take it. Take it all out with it.
I mean, come on, how can you argue with that? It's got a great bass line, it's got a great groove, it's got brilliant vocal harmony layering, it's just a fab track. And if you still have the original copy of Retrograde that suffered from the compression issues, use it as a coaster and go and buy the new one. I don't think it's full price, but it's just totally worth having. It's a really, really good album. So today I want to talk about something that I personally think is so important in terms of EDS and in terms of the sort of journey to diagnosis with it, that I've actually kicked the cat out of the living room because I don't want to be upstaged in the middle of it, and I don't want anything to interrupt my train of thought while I'm trying to sort of put my thoughts together about it. Yeah, what I want to talk about today is it's anxiety. Now, nobody likes to think about anxiety. It's a very common part of being diagnosed with EDS for many and various reasons. And it's also, to a degree, is sort of the big bad wolf, because it's the thing that people are scared of, because it's a mental health condition, and people are still scared of mental health conditions in this day and age because they can get you labelled quite inappropriately. And I said in my very first video, I think I said I wasn't a big fan of labelling, and the main reason for that is my experience of misdiagnosis. And also, I don't want this to come across, and I want to make this very clear at the start, that the reason I am talking to you about this today isn't because I want to relate some dreadful tale of woe and some awful, oh woe is me, haven't I had a dreadful time, da da da. story, because that's just pants and that's boring and dull and it doesn't achieve anything, and that's not why I'm doing it. The reason I'm talking about this is because this happened to me, and because this happened to a lot of people with EDS that I know, and because if it helps one person out there who is sort of struggling to piece together the puzzle, as it were, then all well and good, and that's why I'm talking about it. So in my case, I was actually diagnosed for a very long time, since probably my early 20s, with anxiety, pure and simple. They said I had an anxiety disorder. They said I had generalised anxiety and panic attacks. And now, with the benefit of hindsight and having had my EDS diagnosis and educated myself, I can see as clear as day that what was actually happening to me was autonomic dysfunction. Now, I don't want to get too much into the science / techie bit, because I'm not a doctor and I don't want to give inaccurate information to anybody. But your autonomic nervous system is basically, it's the bit of you that controls the things that you don't consciously think about. So things like respiration rate, heart rate, digestion, things your brain does, temperature control, things like that. And in people with EDS, that system is a little bit wonky, generally. I don't know why, but it's a thing. It's a bit wonky and it doesn't work very well. So you can quite suddenly be, just going about your daily business, and then all of a sudden your heart rate will rocket off into the 150s for absolutely no reason, or you'll start to hyperventilate for no reason, or you'll start to feel very faint, or you'll feel sick, or your vision will start to cloud, or coincidentally, all things that, if you don't know any better, can very, very easily be mistaken for the symptoms of a panic attack. And that's what happened to me, because they didn't know I had EDS because nobody thought to look for it. They diagnosed me with panic attacks when I'm sure what was happening was episodes of autonomic dysfunction. Now, the trouble with that is that once somebody has diagnosed you with anxiety, especially if it's an erroneous diagnosis, every complaint that you go to your GP about, or the hospital or whatever, and I had to do that a lot because I at that time was still undiagnosed with EDS, so there was a lot of weird stuff coming up. Everything tends to be written off as anxiety, and that's what happened to me for 20 years. And the best example I can think of that was actually, it was back in 2003, and I can tell you exactly why I know it was 2003, because I actually missed level 42 at the Hammersmith Apollo because of this, and I was really, really pissed off because I had a front row ticket as well. But I went up to A&E in Chertsey, in Surrey, where I lived at the time, complaining of basically chest pains and very shortness of breath. I couldn't catch my breath. And the backdrop to this is that my partner at the time had a very severe chest infection. He was already in the hospital at the time. He was asthmatic, so he tended to end up in hospital on a nebulizer, which is completely irrelevant, but it helps to paint the picture of what was happening at the time. So there was obviously something going on, and NHS director, as it was at the time, had sent me straight to the hospital, and I went in there saying, I can't breathe, and because I was saying I can't breathe, and because the records that I saw them look at on their computer said anxiety disorder, and I was saying I can't breathe, what they did was they stuck me on a trolley in the corridor with a brown paper bag to breathe into and left me there. What I actually had, as they finally discovered at about 4:30 the next morning, was double pneumonia. And I spent a week in hospital with an oxygen tube up my nose, and it took me 3 months to recover. And that was all because I had been labelled as anxious, and you have an anxiety disorder. So that is the kind of thing that can happen to you if you are labelled in that way. So what then tends to happen is, once this is kind of in your head and it's sort of sown the seed of doubt, and you don't know what's going on in your body, and you have no diagnosis apart from anxiety, so these really random things keep happening to you, and you know deep down that it's not, that there's something going on, that it's not just anxiety. In my case, there was always a pattern to it, in that these weird things would happen which would then make me very anxious. So what would tend to happen was I'd be sitting there minding my own business and suddenly my heart rate would rocket off, and for absolutely no reason, or I would go very, very dizzy, or I would feel like I was about to collapse and pass out. And so you do the only thing you know what to do is you call for help. And they come and get you in the big yellow taxi and they cart you off to A&E. And by the time you get there, everything has stopped. But because you're so frightened about what's happening to you, because you don't have a diagnosis and you don't know what's going on, by the time you get there, you all likelihood probably are having a panic attack because you're so frightened. And they take one look at you and they say, well, of course your heart went funny. You're having a panic attack. That's what happened. And it didn't matter how many times I tried to explain to them, no, it's the other way round. This really random stuff happens, which then makes me panic. They perpetuated their sort of diagnosis of anxiety or just anxious, go home, there's nothing wrong with you. And this went on for so long. I mean, we're talking years. This started when I still lived in Exeter and I moved to London in the year 2000. So this went on since I was in my 20s. It went on for so long that I actually ended up with very severe anxiety as a result, which was really, really, really annoying because it just proved them right. So, you know, what do you do in that situation? Eventually what happens is that you start to believe them and you start to think that it's your fault. And one of the other things that happens as a result of all this is because nobody can tell you what's wrong with you, because by the time you do get to A&E, everything's gone back to normal and your heart rate's gone back to normal and your ECG comes out perfectly normal and everything's A1 tip top, you get labelled, as well as being labelled as somebody with an anxiety disorder, you get labelled as somebody, as an attention seeker, as a hospital shopper, as a waste of A&E resources. And I can't say that I blame them, because when the same person's in A&E 3 times a week and is being told there's nothing wrong with you, go home, I can see why they might, you know, absent any other diagnosis, they might think that you're just there for shits and giggles, pardon my French, you know. But when you're on the receiving end of that, it's soul destroying and it perpetuates the anxiety, because every time you go in there, you're like, I know there's something wrong and they're just sending me home. What is going to happen to me? And especially in this sort of day and age where the NHS is sort of crumbling around our ears, this is very much in the news, and people who make frequent flyers, they call them, in A&E, people who make inappropriate use of A&E are demonised, not only by the Daily Mail, but by, I hate to say it, by A&E staff. I've been on the receiving end of some awful attitudes from staff in hospitals and staff in A&E, and it wasn't my fault, and I was made to feel like a time waster. I was made to feel like I was inappropriately using the services, and I wasn't, and it was all because I was misdiagnosed and all because nobody thought to look for what was actually wrong with me. And you start to think, you know, oh, if only I could control my anxiety a bit better, I wouldn't be so ill, and perhaps they're right. And then they send you off for therapy and counselling, and I went through months of absolutely useless cognitive behavioural therapy because it wasn't a mental issue in my case, it was a physical thing that was starting it, and I couldn't make them understand. And it went on for so long that I actually developed agoraphobia as a result. And that's something I don't tell very many people, so consider yourself privileged. Now I'm telling the whole internet. But again, if it does somebody some good, then so be it. I developed agoraphobia because my anxiety got so severe. Agoraphobia is really not a nice place to be. It has the potential to destroy your entire life, and in my case it very, very nearly did. It got so bad that for quite a long time my safe zone wasn't my house, it was my sofa. And looking back, that just sounds absolutely ridiculous, but I lived on the sofa all day, I slept on it at night, with the door unlocked so that ambulance people could get in if they needed to. Because again, all this weird stuff was still happening to me. And it was complicated in my case by the fact that around this time, again looking back with the benefit of hindsight, was when my proprioceptive function started to pack up. Now, your proprioceptive function is, it's as I was demonstrating in the videos earlier on, which were all well and good until somebody loses an eye. They're all funny, but they do have a serious message behind them, in that your proprioception is your sense of where you are in space and in your surroundings. So, for example, if you close your eyes and you stick your arm out to the side, your brain knows where your arm is. In people with EDS, that function is impaired because the proprioceptors are located in your joints, I think is the medical description. And because your joints move further than the normal range of motion, your brain gets confused and you start to sort of fall over and you start to feel very unbalanced. And in my case, I was trying to leave my house and feeling very unbalanced because my proprioception was starting to pack up, which I then interpreted as, oh God, I can't leave my house because when I do, all this awful stuff happens. So, and it got so bad that even getting up from the sofa to go to the loo was difficult, which I'm not proud of because it sounds awful, but I'm telling you because this is how bad it can get if you are misdiagnosed when you have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And eventually I ended up on Valium because I didn't know what else to do. I went to the doctor and I said, I can't, well, I was probably taken there by somebody else. I could not function. I couldn't function, so they put me on Valium, which then led to 6 months of withdrawal. When I became tolerant to it fairly quickly, it led to 6 months of horrible withdrawal symptoms and a nice dose of protracted benzodiazepine withdrawal syndrome, which was lovely. On top of, I mean, it's bad enough on its own, but on top of undiagnosed EDS, it really, really wasn't fun. And this leads quite neatly onto why I think that anxiety in EDS has an element of autonomic dysfunction to it. Because when I was withdrawing from the Valium, I met a lady on a forum, which was, we were actually both moderators on, it was a benzo withdrawal forum, basically, a support forum for people who were going through the hell of trying to come off tranquilizers. I know she won't mind me saying this because she's a lovely lady. I've been friends with her for many years and I know she'll be watching, so hopefully she won't mind me using her as a case study. But she had exactly the same problem. And I used to go and see her and she'd say, oh, Leese, I feel terrible. I'm fine when I'm sitting down or lying down. And as soon as I start to get up, my heart rate races, I feel dizzy, I feel sick, I feel terrible. And that was why she had ended up on Valium as well, because they misdiagnosed her with anxiety. And so she has since been diagnosed with EDS type 3 and autonomic dysfunction. So I do think there's something in it. And I wonder how many of us that are undiagnosed with EDS have actually been wrongly diagnosed with anxiety disorders. I don't know the statistics, but I would like to know, and it's something I'd like some research to be done into. When your body starts to crumble around you and nobody can tell you why, apart from saying there's nothing wrong with you, you're anxious, go home. It's like living in a house that's falling down, but you don't know why. And you don't know how to fix it. And you'll be sort of sitting in your house and then suddenly a bit of the roof will fall in and knock you on the head and knock you out. Or the windows will blow out and the big bad wolf will come in, or, you know, just all this random stuff. And it's completely random as well. So you never know when bits of your house are going to fall down. So you're constantly on your guard for looking around your house, trying to make sure nothing is about to fall down, which in turn makes you very, very anxious about living in your house, as it would, because you don't know when it's going to start hurting you. And that is what happens to a lot of people without their EDS diagnosis. And that is what happened to me. And I could not see a way out of it. I thought I was going to be stuck like that forever until I got my diagnosis, which came about as a result of a sacroiliac joint subluxation, partial dislocation, which isn't the way I would recommend getting a diagnosis, but it certainly did the trick. And I can distinctly remember waking up the day after I had my diagnosis, and for the first time in maybe 20 years, I wasn't afraid of my body anymore. The first thing I used to do every single morning, the second my eyes cracked open, was to mentally scan my body for symptoms. What's it doing today? What's my heart doing? What is my breathing doing? Do I feel strange? Am I going to have a panic attack? Every single day I would wake up like that, to the point where it got so bad I actually lost my job over it. And after I had my diagnosis, that all stopped, because I had a reason, because I knew why the house was falling down, and I knew that these things were awful and scary and a part of EDS, but they likely weren't going to kill me, which is what I always thought before, because nobody could tell me why they were happening. And I walked into Dr. Hakim's office in November 2012, and he took one look at me. And actually, before I walked into his office, he came out into the waiting room and saw how I was sitting. And he actually mentioned it in the appointment, and he took one look at me and he said, "Oh God, yeah." He said, "Just look at you." He said, "You were a textbook case of EDS3. You have this, this, this and this." And I just looked at him and I was like, "Oh yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right." And how it had been missed for 40 years, God only knows. Because I was 40 when I was diagnosed, but it was. And the reason I'm telling you all this is because if you have a diagnosis of anxiety and it doesn't seem quite right, and perhaps you can do these sort of weird bendy joint tricks, check it out. Just get it checked out, because take it from me, 20 years misdiagnosis and 20 years of being made to feel that you're a bit mad and that it's all your fault, and that if you just controlled your anxiety better, you wouldn't be sick anymore. It's going to piss you off. It really does. And annoyingly, in my case, it's too late to do anything about it, because there's a 3-year rule and it's now too late. But that is why I'm telling this story, is I don't want other people with EDS to have to suffer like I did for 20 years. And this is part of the reason why I'm doing this challenge, this crazy, stupid challenge, is because one of the things EDS UK are very, very, very good at is educating and advocating in this area. And they're very, very good at educating medical professionals. In my case, all this happened to me because nobody thought to join the dots and nobody thought to check for EDS, which is what I had. Now, EDS UK's work is helping to make sure that that doesn't happen, because it's happening too much. It happened to me, it happened to my friend, it happened to at least another person that I know who was also diagnosed by Dr. Hakim, and she had very bad, she was diagnosed with anxiety and agoraphobia as well. So that's at least 3 people that I know. And EDS UK's work is helping to make sure that this doesn't happen to people anymore. So while this seems like a frivolous challenge, as I said a couple of days ago, it isn't. It's very important, and I hope you will consider sponsoring me. Thank you.